Hey everybody. I spend so much time on the internet having conversations that I often feel the daily insight of our peers is equally as valuable as the more formal presentations. Today, I'm joined by three of our speakers at the upcoming CBP Spring Virtual Conference, happening this April 3rd to 5th, for a conversation to discuss what's currently on their mind, what's going on in the world in the corner of craft beer that they exist. But before we meet our guest, I want to give a big thank you to Aseptic Fruit Purees, craftbreweryfinancialtraining.com, and Jason Sleeman, Brewery Lender, for all your support in the upcoming conference. And Scott, a special thanks to you for your inspiration today. And you'll find out very shortly on that one. But now for a round of introductions. Aaron, because you are to the right of me, you get to go first. Who are you? You've been on this like a billion times before, but for anyone who hasn't caught you before, outside of your love of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, of course, what else do you do in the world of craft beer?
Well, my name is Aaron Gore, and if you know, you know. No, I'm the Senior Director of Business Development for Bevana. We work with small beverage makers from across the world, help them continue to grow, develop, and reach customers that otherwise they'd never have the opportunity to.
Awesome. Well, thanks for being here, Aaron. And what are you going to be talking about at this conference?
I had to look it up because I completely forgot. I'm going to be speaking on tea leaves using data to manage a smart portfolio. So portfolio management using both internal and external data to really refine that and make sure that you're putting out the products that are going to work for you.
And quick, one more follow-up for you. Aaron, in so many of your session titles that you've presented over the years, you use some sort of food reference. Why?
I like food. People like food. And honestly, if it helps people understand what I'm getting at, then why not?
Keep it approachable. I like it. Now, Scott, you're up.
I'm looking forward to Aaron's presentation, especially if it has a food title. Scott Kolbe, Market Your Craft, and we work with breweries, wineries, and distilleries to really help them drive traffic, build engagement, and capture new sales because it's complicated and crowded out there, as we always know.
And what are you going to be talking about at this conference?
Well, I'm excited to try and figure out ChatGPT. Everybody's talking about it, and we have an opportunity to see where breweries can really get ahead of it.
It's going to be a fun one. I'm looking forward to it. And last but not least, Fred, great to see you again. How's everything going today?
Everything's terrific, thanks.
And what do you do in the world of beer, Fred, and what are you going to be talking about at the conference?
I'm a mergers and acquisitions and valuation advisor, and I lead our food and beverage practice at our firm, work with breweries to help them sell if that's necessary, advise them on defining criteria to acquire, and also help them with valuations. I'm going to be talking about the truth behind business valuations, because I think a lot of business owners may read in the press about market multiples in general, but are not skilled enough or I'll say knowledgeable enough to kind of drill down and understand how multiples are different industry by industry, size of business, and even the nature of the buyer can drive a difference in your valuation.
And Fred, are you seeing more breweries reach out to you these days?
I am. I think, the Brewers Association released some statistics that last year there were more breweries closing than in any of the last 10 years. And frankly, I'm seeing troubles. Those breweries that opened maybe 5 years ago, 17 and 18, they took out loans, they bought equipment, they started paying rent, and then the pandemic in many states just shut them down. And so they had all these financial obligations with no sales revenue coming in. They dug themselves a big hole of debt, and now realizing that their current operations, although somewhat back to where they were, is just not enough to really dig them out of the hole. They're digging a little bit, but they're not getting out. And I'm seeing more breweries wanting to sell or seeking investor capital to move them forward.
Awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to your session. I think it's an important one that we have. Now, everyone, right before this conversation, I said to ChatGPT, you expected this one, Scott, didn't you? I said, I'm hosting a panel conversation that leads up to the Craft Beer Professionals Spring Virtual Conference. What are 3 questions I should ask our panelists? So I let the site do the work for me. Let's have a conversation. So let's begin. With the pandemic affecting the craft beer industry in various ways, what do you see as the biggest challenges and opportunities facing the industry in the coming year? Aaron? Have
Well,
at
the
it.
biggest opportunity that I see in the craft beer industry is to take over mergers and acquisitions. Since Fred dropped off the stream, I feel like we're taking that. No, I think one of the biggest challenges and opportunities within the industry is the fact that the industry is going to have to mature, or rather, that the industry itself is maturing around it, the market's maturing around it, and a lot of our entire way of doing business, our entire way of operating as businesses has been built around hobbyists, has been built around people who come into this with a passion, but not really a desire to think as business people first and foremost. Unfortunately, that was never going to last. And honestly, it wasn't that sustainable even before the pandemic. So now that we're in an era where people are having to operate as business people who are passionate, I think you're going to see a lot change just in the day-to-day. And a lot of opportunity for people who are able to think beyond just having a cool time in the tap room with some of the folks they like.
Do you feel it was primarily the pandemic that motivated brewery owners and managers to really focus more on the businessy aspects, of their brand, or do you feel it was already coming?
Oh, they still haven't gotten there yet. When they get there and start thinking that way, I'll let you know. But it has made it a lot more relevant and a lot more pressing. It was always going to wind up happening. It was beginning before the pandemic, but it accelerated a lot of trends that were already beginning. And a lot of companies that frankly were unsustainable in the long term anyhow have either discovered the poison pills that were already in there, or have had to drastically reevaluate how they are approaching their businesses as things have become more congested within the market and things have started to turn a lot more red ocean.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. Scott, how about you? What do you believe are some of the biggest challenges and opportunities facing the industry right now?
Well, I love the fact that you set me up for my presentation by generating the 3 questions you were going to use today through ChatGPT.
I did have to ask twice to get the ones that I really wanted to use. The first round was a little too generic, so round 2 was better.
Well, I'm just waiting for the time that you just use a still image of yourself and have a bot talk for you. In all seriousness, though, you just highlighted.
I am a bot. I don't exist anywhere but on the internet.
I've never met him in real life.
You'll meet me soon enough. In all seriousness, though, I think you brought up a really fundamental point of ChatGPT, and that's the learning capacity, where it actually responds, and that response thread creates a tighter and tighter result in response. And so I'm looking forward to talking about it, just because, like a scientist, I'm trying to figure it out just like everybody else. You see it in your feeds literally every single day. As a marketer, I want to try and capture that energy. How can I put my brewery ahead of the others in a brewery near me search where only 5 or 6 breweries are returned? That Bing is just one opportunity for ChatGPT and other artificial intelligence bots like that to be focusing results and giving you something that's more of a pathway to yes, as opposed to 1,000 different responses. But in answer to your question originally, I think consumers are demanding transparency from marketers in any industry, and the breweries are not immune to that. And so to actually come up with your differentiating factors helps people find you in a relevant way that pays off their curiosity, with a tasting room that offers a great environment, award-winning beers, a patio that's dog and family friendly. Like, these things are fundamental to breweries, but we're not telling people that we have them. So we need to get back to our roots. We need to be honest about who we are, and ChatGPT and indexes and any sort of ambassadors for your brand will point to you as opposed to anybody else.
I think a challenge that I know I face personally, I know a lot of breweries, I believe, face as well. We have so much information we want to share with the world, but not enough hours in the day and capacity to do so. So, I mean, whether we have these patios, awesome beers, there's things we want to share. How do we do it where people actually hear it?
Well, there are a number of different ways you can do it, but you start with the basics, just like you said. Maybe rather than spending a disproportionate amount of time on social media, videos and such, which are also very important, let's start with the fundamentals first and let those work for us. Let indexes, search engines, ChatGPT find us based on our fundamental principles of being a brewery, the fundamental principles of marketing. And then once you're done with the basics, then layer on all the pleasantries with videos and TikTok and whatnot.
I'm looking forward to that out of you, Scott, because I think that's one of the things I've heard the most pushback on things like ChatGPT is, takes the artistry and the work out of it. It does it for you. But, the way I look at it, it's a lot more like malting. Once upon a time, people running breweries had to malt all their own grain before they could brew at all. When malting was taking that step and giving them something that isn't finished, but it's giving them that kernel to work with and removing that labor intensive portion for them to be able to build from. Having done copywriting in the past, it's not going to replace you, but if it can give you that starting point to refine, build that messaging, I think that's awesome to be able to really use as a tool.
Agreed. And Aaron, I don't know if it's intentional or not, but you used the word kernel, another food reference you've thrown into.
It was 100% intentional. I was pretty proud of doing that on a malting thing, by the way.
Now, Fred, you touched at it earlier, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about what you see as the biggest challenges and opportunities that we're facing this year.
Well, I think there are several. I think part of it is just the need to finally recognize that the breweries are a business and not an artistry. A lot of brewers got into it because they wanted to brew beer. I mean, think about the home brewing market. It was huge until maybe about 10 years ago and has been on a consistent decline, because if you wanted anything other than a Budweiser 10 years ago, you had to make it yourself. But now I can get a mango-infused IPA 10 minutes from my house at one brewery that's a Caribbean themed, and I can get, a chocolate porter with curry somewhere else. The ability to drink quality craft recipes is there in the marketplace. So the home brewing industry is just dead. You don't need it for the reason you had it before. So I think a lot of brewers got into it because they liked making beer. Their friends told them they made great beer. And it's like, geez, why don't you monetize this? But they never really thought far enough that, am I trying to create a job or am I trying to create a business where, yeah, I get paid a salary for the hourly work that I do, but I should be earning a return on my business for my investment at the same time, because I'm taking on a lot of risk. I can put that money to use in many other ways. I'm choosing to do something that's going to be fun, but I'm not sure that enough brewers had that wider perspective, and that's starting to hurt them now. It's great when there's more demand than you can supply and everybody wants it, but now that we're entering some tough times, it's only the strong survive.
Well, there's not a definitive answer for this, but Fred, is it too late to hone in on those business skills, or is now the time they need to be calling people like you?
Well, some are just in a hole that's just too deep, but many others I think are on the cusp and can catch it in time. Obviously, they have to have a good product, but they have to understand the business side of what they're doing, whether it's the marketing, the cost controls and cost management, the personnel management. Just to give you an example, I was working with a Texas-based brewery that's been in business 5 years and just breaking even. And as we analyzed it, we realized that their personnel costs were off the chart compared to, I'll say, best practices and industry guidelines. That's manageable, and maybe they can claw them their way back. But so there's one I think management can intervene and start to make improvements. But
Go ahead, Fred. Sorry.
No, it's a business that's, let's say, doing 1.5 million of revenue, and they wanted to sell for 4 million. And I said, well, what are your profits? Well, we don't have any. We have break even. So how many people would want to make an investment where there is no return on your investment? I don't think too many, let alone spend 4 million.
So a follow-up, not from ChatGPT, for businesses, looking to hone their business skills and they realize they might be in trouble, they're probably not going to go get their MBA. But how and where can they get greater skills to be successful? I'd love to hear all three of your thoughts on, what you can do if you realize you might be in a hole and it's time to get out.
I'll just start. There's an organization called SCORE, the Service Corps of Retired Executives, I think it is, which is a free resource funded by local governments that can help small business owners with budgeting and business plans and understanding their cost of capital and how much money they might need to really fund the project that they envision or what they're in the middle of. So there are local free or low cost resources around.
Aaron?
Yeah, I'd say one key to echo Fred's point, there's a lot of free resources out there, not just focused at the brewing industry, but focused at small businesses in general and teaching small business literacy and basic business skills. I've had similar experiences when I was doing consulting of working with one brewery in particular that had been in business for 7 years and didn't even have a basic P&L. I mean, they're basically using managerial accounting for everything they were doing, and it wasn't even really accounting. They were basically just doing ad hoc numbers pulls when it was tax time. That's not sustainable. So whether it's reaching out to someone like us at Bevana, we work with a lot of companies that they know that they're facing capital or capacity constraints or just challenges to growth in general. We can help surmount those and continue to meet demands. But when it comes to taking charge within your own business, one thing I would highly recommend would be take one of the Brewing Business Essentials courses that a lot of colleges are starting to offer. I know UVM, I've done some adjunct work for them. I know University of Portland has some fantastic programs. Sam Holloway out there, who I know has been a friend of CBP for a while, great dude.
I remember talking to Sam Holloway when I first got into the industry. Sam's an amazing person.
Sam is fantastic, and he's always willing to help folks.
And crafting a strategy is Sam's right. Great content.
UNC Charlotte, I've done some adjunct work for. So, those courses aren't going to teach you how to brew because presumably you either know how to do that or know how to find somebody to do that. That's not the hard part. That's what everybody thinks is going to be the hard part. But, the line I've used time and time again is you can make great beer and be a home brewer. You get into this industry to sell great beer. And that means that you have to understand how to run a business, how to market a business, and how to connect with customers and be able to provide them with the product that you see value in producing. That's key.
Also, I might mention the Brewers Association has a mentorship program, and I'm actually going to be teaching in this spring cohort where they bring in, 25 to 35 early stage brewers and teach them a variety of things and give them access to resources to get their questions answered.
That's awesome, Fred. Scott, your turn.
Well, Andrew, to your credit, I think forums like CBP are the place where people need to start. There are a lot of free resources that are out there, and people talking to people is how stuff gets done. If you exhaust all of your free resources, then there's the next layer of association guilds and kind of that paid level of support, even before you get to folks like Aaron, myself, and others who are happy to provide strategic and tactical guidance for breweries who are looking to get this done. So there are definitely tiers of support that are available that aren't fully utilized.
Yeah, that's
no, ignore Scott. Come to me first.
We did a panel a few years ago, and it was some industry partners on the panel, and we kind of came to the conclusion that the C word is a little scary. And by C word, I mean consultants. But, I love to surround myself with people smarter than me. And what business owner doesn't want to have a team of very knowledgeable people, whether on staff or someone you outsource? So I think reaching out to people with that breadth of knowledge is extremely important.
Could I make a comment on Fred's bit real quickly, before we move on to the second of the ChatGPT questions? I think Fred's points were spot on where the industry is headed, and those breweries that opened maybe 5-7 years ago. I think what we're also seeing is those who have achieved a regional, multi-state or bigger scale are starting to look at the beyond beer and kind of the innovation center strategy, where they're diversifying in order to meet what the consumers of the moment are asking for, which is also a tricky strategy as well. If you're meeting the consumers where they are, that's always a good thing to an extent, because you don't want to dilute the value of your brand and kind of that fundamental why you got into craft brewing, then I would also follow up with, let's take a look at the last 3 years where you had people working from home and had an abundance of time and still were getting paid a similar amount of money for the most part. So they took up the hobby of home brewing as a DIY, something that I always wanted to dip my toe in, right? And so these home brewers, to a certain extent, that's died off because, of course, everybody has to go back to work. But these home brewers had a vested interest in craft succeeding. And so they started at home with a clone recipe of Sierra Nevada Pale Ale or something equally iconic. They scaled up and they kind of got creative. And I would say that prompted that group to take more interest in their local breweries and what was happening from an innovation perspective. But just like Fred said, we're seeing it kind of level out because the time has gone down. The disposable income hasn't, but there's so much crowding in the craft brew industry right now that there's not enough money in order to sustain everything. And so you have to see some collapse and some contraction of that.
I think there's another interesting factor going on. I'm in Pennsylvania. I'm not sure what you guys see in your areas, but most of the craft breweries started in an industrial setting, right? The rent was cheap, and the approach was, I'm going to manufacture and distribute. I'm going to can it, bottle it, and distribute it, and have a tap room for people to come and taste my product. But the manufacturing was primary, and the hospitality was secondary. I think that COVID and these just sort of hibernation we all had to go through has released a new customer experience and expectation that, I want more than cinder blocks and picnic tables. So the brewers that I'm talking to now are all saying, if I open up a second location, it's going to be a retail, Main Street frontage, more of a restaurant experience, even if I don't offer food, because in some states, a manufacturing brewery tap room cannot offer food. But if you can, be a brew pub and, my own pun, tap into that customer experience expectation that is driving a new type of beer consumer.
That's a really interesting point, Fred. About 5 years ago, 6 years ago even, I was saying you have to do more than make really great beer. But I think at that point in time, a lot of people still had if you brew it, they will come mentality. And that's definitely changed. As we close on 10,000 or so, I think the importance of that overall customer experience differentiates is absolutely huge. With that said, that leads us to ChatGPT question number 2. And I will say this robot generated question, I don't fully love the wording of it, but I'm going to pose it as is, and we can dive into the semantics later and take it in whatever direction you want, because I think it'll be fun either way.
Bring it on, Skynet.
Here we go. With the rise of hard seltzers and other alternative alcoholic beverages, how do you see the craft beer industry evolving and adapting to changing consumer preferences? Who wants to have at it first?
Oh, hell, I'll take it. So I think one of the most important things to keep in mind is beer is no longer the category that it used to be. And by that, I mean, it was never really quite the category that it used to be. So craft beer has always been a multi-style, very broad umbrella, basically since the rise of craft beer in the first place. And inside the industry, we get so hung up on things like style guidelines and categorical distinctions that we forget the fact that for most customers, they're not a beer drinker or a wine drinker. At best, they were an IPA drinker or a stout drinker. And now, to borrow a term from Bart Watson at the BA, the average consumer, especially young consumers, is omnibulous. They drink across categories based on use occasion, based on flavor preferences. And in general, those flavor preferences drive things more than category. So I think it's a bit misleading for us to treat ourselves as being a brewery versus a beverage company, because we have always been beverage companies in the eyes of consumers. Now, with that being said, the key to be differentiated and to be able to stand out from your competition has also not only never been more true, but becomes increasingly true as the industry becomes more crowded and more places begin to pop up. So even if everybody is now seen as being a beverage company, that does not mean you have to branch out beyond beer. And it does not mean you have to produce every style of beer out there. More and more, the ones that are really succeeding are the ones that are extremely well defined, whether that's the hype breweries that are really leaning fully on the hazies and the fruited kettle sours, whether that's, someone like Old Mecklenburg here in the Charlotte area that's fully Reinheitsgebot German style Bavarian brewery who is now branching out to their own risk. You really need to double down on your differentiators and the things that really define you, while being aware that to your average consumer, that definition of you is a lot more important than the definition of beer.
Well said, Aaron. Well said.
I agree. I'm seeing the convergence of brewery, distillery, restaurant, food service, really trying to be a multi-channel operation within that umbrella of alcoholic and non-alcoholic beverage offerings, but really a place to go. It's sort of an alternative coffee shop. In fact, I'm even seeing the merger of coffee shops and distilleries, whether it's you've got a 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. shift and then a 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. Offering, or it's just all there all day.
And those are some of my favorite places to visit. I love a brewery coffee shop. Fantastic. Scott, one reason I was upset with this question is it said alternative alcoholic beverages versus just alternative beverages. That's one edit I would have made, but I'll let you roll with it.
Yeah, it's a great call out, Andrew. So to Fred's point, another nod to his responses, I think there are probably two ways that you can go. And his diversification response, where a brewery becomes a distillery and kind of adds on a coffee shop and such to be a one-stop shop, is definitely one path. But I think for most breweries, it's not practical, not realistic, and it's also further diluting their brand in a way that's not sustainable. I think you have to have some momentum and some scale in order to A/B test some of these things. And too many of the breweries in the past decade who have come up thinking, I'm going to have the same success as a Brooklyn Beer or something else, or I'm going to design myself into a purchase scenario where I'm going to get paid $1 billion with a B and retire to an island. These strategies aren't fruitful anymore. We are, as consumers, more hesitant, more reluctant. As investors don't see the golden goose in that scenario anymore. And so my belief is that if you have the scale and the momentum to try a beyond beer strategy, then do so in a very calculated, strategic way. That's going to be 1% of the craft players right now. It's probably the top 50, right? The other strategy may be to double down on brewing true to style and creating beers that are just excellent representations of the lager and pilsner style, which again, you're starting to see a resurgence of people who want to drink a nice clean beer over a 3-hour period and still be able to drive home. So there's that. And then Andrew, to your initial point, I think we need to take a look at a third strategy, which is non-alcoholic as a very viable beverage. You pointed out in ChatGPT alternative alcoholic beverages. Well, sure, seltzers and hard juices like we're seeing now, that these are possible, but there's also a consumer coming of age right now that doesn't want the nonsense, doesn't want the crowded craft question when he or she goes to shelf or to retail. They also are taking a healthier approach to their lifestyle. So I think these breweries, wineries, and distilleries really need to get a non-alcoholic option right, either internally or buy what's best at shelf, buy best practices at shelf, because you don't want to invest in the equipment, the process, the experience.
I agree with you, Scott. I think it'd be extremely difficult to be a top craft brewery and a top craft distiller at the same time. What I like is a different type of diversification. I just went to an axe throwing center that now is an axe throwing and brewery center. And I've seen bowling alleys that are also bowling alleys and breweries combined. So adding a recreation element to what you're doing, you could still be a great craft brewery and a cool bowling alley without diluting the beverage side of what you do. And so now you're an event space. You're an attraction that's maybe got a family aspect. But and just to keep rambling on, I'm now seeing some breweries that are saying we don't want kids. This is just for adults, as another way to kind of figure out their positioning in a very crowded market.
Jokes on that. I'm way more annoying than your average kid.
Well, it's funny Fred mentioned that because we had a pretty engaged thread the other day in CBP on kids and breweries. It happens, once every handful of months.
Nobody on that forum has any strong feelings on that topic at all, Andrew.
Not at all. But, there was an interesting comment there. Someone had mentioned, I believe it was Casey at Four Noses in Colorado. He mentioned it's their goal not to be a place for kids. And it was pretty interesting because he said a lot of the decor they bring in, whether it's like lots of high tops, lots of bar stools, just whether it's their hours or offerings, they just don't offer the kid-friendly products. It's meant to slightly deter so they have more of an adult crowd. So it's interesting, not only are breweries catering towards families, like you mentioned, Fred, but also going the opposite way.
Yeah. But what has a longer
I think
shelf
that
life?
speaks more than anything. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, Aaron, I was just thinking, what has a longer shelf life? The seltzer that they just really quickly put together in order to appeal to a smaller set of their customers, or being family friendly. You may define yourself, and good for you for saying no kids allowed. I get that. But again, I look at kind of the hierarchy of, if I'm going to expand my offerings, let's start by expanding the customer experience first, and then kind of funnel from there. And if I eventually get to, maybe I should put together a seltzer, maybe I should become a distillery, then fine. But start with the bigger ocean of people first.
Good insight there, Scott. Fred? Aaron?
I think it even honestly speaks to specialization. I mean, if you have a place that doesn't allow kids, I don't think there's anything necessarily damning about that, because that is the role that they are filling. And there's still plenty of room for other breweries that do the opposite. For example, my 4-year-old, and I know I've used this anecdote before, my 4-year-old has a favorite brewery. It's probably the one I go to the most often. So Replay Brewing in Fort Mill, South Carolina is her favorite brewery. Why? Because the entire thing, top to bottom, is video game themed. They have arcade machines, pinball, Super Nintendos. In top to bottom, it's themed out, and it has a really distinct vibe, and she absolutely loves it. By the same token, for some people who are looking to get away from people like me, who drag their kids to, breweries every freaking weekend, it's okay that they have a place to go to, as long as that is the role they're serving. But there is a cap on how many of those the market can sustain, to your point, Scott, because they're aiming for a very particular demographic, and that is people who hate children and joy.
Well, with that said, ChatGPT didn't ask about kids and breweries, so we're going to go on to the next question, gentlemen. Apologize for that. We can have this conversation later and express all those fun feelings. But the next one, the AI wanted me to ask you all was, what advice do you have for up-and-coming craft beer professionals, especially those who are just starting out in the industry, and what skills and knowledge are essential for success in this field? I think we touched on it earlier, but I'll let you all dive into it a little bit deeper. And once again, what advice do you have for people who are just getting into the industry?
Sure. I'll start with this one. I think you have to think hard about what is going to be your brand identity and positioning. How are you going to stand out in a crowded market? Whether it is a brewery that likes kids or a brewery that bans kids, whether it's a brewery that lets you bring your dog or I'm seeing them now that they are breweries built around a pet experience with a dog park and a brewery all in one unit, so you can sit and throw down some beers and let your dog prance around in a fenced area for an hour's rental time with other dogs. So it's taking it one step further. But there's a lot of good beer around, so you have to have more than just that better mousetrap. It's you've got to have an experience that is attractive.
I would say that something that's often overlooked is just who you surround yourself with. And if you're a new brewery in the last 1 to 3 years, or if you're starting to think about opening up a brewery, I would think very strategically about the 2 or 3 partners or the small team, because we know for a fact that brewers are DIY folks. And so it's harder for a brewer or an owner to acknowledge a gap and say, you know what, I really need to talk to Aaron because he knows what he's talking about for the most part. No, I really need to talk to Scott because it seems like, ChatGPT is in his back pocket. It's very hard for a DIY brewer to admit that they don't have the skills or the capacity or the capabilities internally in order to get something done. I am a good brewer, and that, to your point, Andrew, good beer is enough. So I would be very objective, and I would look strategically at surrounding myself with people who have obviously the brewing, the production experience, people who are broad-based in terms of their business acumen and experience. Somebody, you don't have to fill all the hats, and everybody doesn't get their own in a startup, but somebody who's got some marketing chops, somebody who understands HR and how to create a culture of success from the very beginning so they don't have to retrofit it after the fact. We oftentimes jump into a business with our best friend who liked the homebrew and had some extra money to kind of help me with my startup, but we need to think a little more strategically about that.
And agreed wholeheartedly with everything that Scott and Fred said. I'm actually going to tackle this from a little different perspective, more towards actual craft people looking to break into the craft beer industry on the ground level, rather than just as owners. And from that standpoint, I would say one of the biggest things to keep in mind is that at the end of the day, this is a job. Yeah, it's a job in beer. Yeah, it's a fun job. It's a fun industry, but you have to treat this like a job. It's the only way to be successful. And that means when you're first getting started out, stay humble and also mind what you're doing. It's probably a good idea when you're first breaking in to be wary of the fact that you're entering an industry with infinite access, basically, to a drug. You're going to be surrounded by it at all times. Probably a best idea not to drink on the job until you've been in it long enough to know what the hell you're doing and to be organized enough to make sure you're going to be able to execute. Otherwise, you're going to wind up in that position of being the guy everybody likes to drink with, but he's the worst sales rep in the whole damn city. It's also important to make sure that you never, ever, ever pass up an opportunity for learning. This is an industry of small businesses, and like any small business, no matter what your actual job title is, you are likely going to wind up having to do any of a million different roles within the organization. That's all opportunities to learn and develop and become that much better and more well-rounded of a person for whatever you wind up doing next, because this does tend to be a very incestual industry. You started as a sales rep, and before you know it, you're the marketing head, and before you know it, you're the assistant brewer. You're going to be a lot better off if you're learning every step of the way. And the last thing that I would say is try to keep one foot outside of the industry, both from a business development standpoint, but more realistically, just as far as your friends and your hobbies. It's important to be able to keep those things to keep you grounded, because as awesome as this industry is, it does turn very inward looking, and it can take over every aspect of your life. So keep those things that keep you grounded, keep you focused, and let you continue to develop and, become a more well-rounded person because of this industry, not in spite of it.
Aaron, I'm going to echo and expand a little bit on what you just said. I love how much you focused on professional development and just constant growth. I think that's so important. But I think on a personal level too, it is great to interact with a lot of people, especially in craft beer, but also outside of craft beer. I know every Thursday I go to a local meetup of entrepreneurs. They span tons of different industries, whether the local military, whether they're university professors, whether they're a startup founder. we all bring such unique conversation and talking points to these get-togethers, albeit they are at a brewery, of course. But, I'm always in for just learning from them. If I can leave this conversation either inspired, a takeaway I can apply to my business, or a takeaway I can pass along to Aaron. Aaron, here's a great new food you need to try. I won't say peanut butter. But, if you can walk away with some sort of takeaway that you can pass along in our industry, I think it's so important. And so often, like you mentioned, Aaron, I think we interact with a lot of the same people. We get these same circles, and you're just passing around a lot of ideas, hence trivia nights at every single brewery in the country on every Wednesday night. Look outside and talk to these people from other industries to get inspired, because there's so much we can learn from talking to people outside of our comfort zone. Now, that's somewhat a lead into, this is not a ChatGPT question. This is just something that I want to dive into for the three of you. What's currently inspiring the three of you right now? It could be a book you're listening to, a podcast, or a book you're reading, perhaps. It could be, even a song, someone you've met in your life that has a big impact on you. For the three of you, what's inspiring you right now?
That's a big question, always a tough question. I mean, honestly, I am the worst at taking my own advice. So outside of cooking, I don't have a whole lot outside of the broader beverage industry, although I will say I've been doing a lot more of playing and learning within the cider side of things recently. Has been a huge thing as I study for my Sommelier exam. I've done consulting in the cider industry in the past, but it's definitely been a whole new pathway to learn. And also, I've got my two daughters, and for me, that's always a key and abiding element. It's awesome to be able to see the world not only through their eyes, but through the eyes of somebody who is under the age of 21. Can sometimes be sobering in both the metaphorical and the literal sense.
I think it's awesome, that you take that time for your family as well, Aaron, because I think they probably inspire you to be better as well.
Oh, by far. I am a much better person for my wife keeping me out of jail, and my daughter's making me want to actually be better. So, thank God they're here.
Love it. Fred, what
Sure.
gets you excited these days?
Professionally, I'm getting excited about expanding the work I do. I previously was focused on managing transactions, advising owners on selling and others on acquiring to grow their business. And now I'm spending a lot more time advising and coaching on building value. I'm trying to drive home the tenet that focusing on like profit is something that the general manager, the chief financial officer, somebody like that in the organization should be focused on generating profit, but the owner should be focused on creating value. And it's different. And it's not something that you're just going to pick up. There's some training involved and a direction to focus on. And I'm finding that really rewarding, because I can help these businesses. I don't need to help these businesses sell. I can help them grow. And that's extremely gratifying. So I'm really enjoying that part of my professional life. My family is keeping me busy between 2 kids, a wife and grandkids. It's a challenge to squeeze the work in sometimes. But, as I guess Aaron, you said, a 4-year-old, sometimes kids say things that are inspiring. And I won't bore you with all the great quotes from my 2-year-old grandchild, but some of them are things that are just sticking with me and becoming rules to live by.
To share a personal story that happened to me last night, like Aaron and Scott, I've dove a bit into the non-alcoholic space. I always seek out alternative beverages, and I have, a nice NA beer sometimes with dinner. Last night, I was having one from 1820. We had recently had a fantastic conversation with, and my son looks at me. He knows it's a drink that only I drink, and he knows we go to breweries, and he has a great time there, like Aaron's kids. And he looks at me and he goes, "Daddy, I like beer." And I did not know how to respond to that one. So they say some interesting things, right, Fred?
I think the right answer is Pilsner or IPA.
My daughter likes playing bar. She likes going to get daddy a lager. Raise them right.
That's good.
On to you, Scott, with that said.
Well, Andrew, in all fairness, I think Europeans have it right with respect to introducing their children in a responsible way.
Scott, my son is 3 years old. 3 years old.
maybe give them a couple years, but I do think that the family is the best introduction to responsible drinking. On a personal note, I'm still stoked about skiing in the Denver area. We've still got a lot of season left, and I'm going to take full advantage of it. Professionally, what gets me excited is rebranding. And, to all of the points today, some of these breweries who have 5 or 10 years behind them have to reinvent themselves. And we've been talking about the kind of tangible beers and beyond beers and non-alcoholic, but the brand also sometimes needs a refresh. And so we have that opportunity internally to take a look at ourselves or look in the mirror and say, you know what, I feel like I've changed a little bit, and consumers are asking different from me. They want me to be something more to their usage occasion, to their styles, to their beyond beer kind of repertoire, or to the tasting room experience, to Fred's point, right? So I feel like rebranding is an exercise that a lot of people are going through right now, and I'm excited on how they're really addressing the changes in the industry from a marketing perspective and how to stand out at shelf.
Good insight there, Scott. I'm glad that's inspiring you and getting excited. Well, today it's been a lot of fun. I never know where these conversations will go. So first off, I'm looking forward to each of your 3 sessions at the upcoming Spring Virtual Conference. For anyone listening, whether it be live or whether you're watching after the fact, it happens live April 3rd to 5th. All of these sessions will be available forever. So no matter when you're listening to this preview panel, the sessions that these speakers will be giving in just a couple of weeks be available forever into the future on our YouTube station. So Aaron, and Scott and Fred, for anyone looking to get a hold of you or reach out with any questions, how can they do so? And Aaron, start us off.
Yeah, you can find me on most of the social media networks under Ale Chaser, ALECHASER, or however you spell that. And you can also find our company Bevana online at Find Bevana. That's Find BEVANA. Pretty much any of those same social media networks. So.
Awesome. Thanks, Aaron. Scott, how can people get a hold of you?
Please reach out to me at Market Your Craft, and Aaron can speak to how to spell that, but marketyourcraft.com. And we're happy to help anybody who's struggling with some of these sales or marketing issues find a pathway forward.
Awesome. Always a pleasure having you, Scott. And Fred, last but not least.
Sure. I can be found on LinkedIn and also our company website, StonyHillAdvisors.com. That's StonyHillAdvisors.com. And the email is fred@StonyHillAdvisors.com.
Nice and simple. Well, thanks for being here, Aaron, Scott, Fred. It's been a pleasure having you all today. I'd love to also thank ChatGPT for doing my job. I'll see you all very, very soon. And everybody enjoy the rest of your days. Cheers.
Cheers.